what else do? We look at why are people turning up this time? Right, okay. Right. It's now online now. We're all ready to go. So let's find out, folks, if there's any news from. Right, okay. A few explanations. Yesterday, I was filming at I was on set. I was filming at UNE, and I can't tell you what production it was because, to be honest with you, I don't know what it was either. But as you do, so that meant that yesterday's class was waylaid. So this is why we've got Margaret joined us and Will's joined us. So let's see if there's any news tonight. Right, Goff, anything you'd like to say?
No, it's all been very quiet. I got no news at all.
Well, last week was a revelation, wasn't it? 7 bits of news. Well, unfortunately, it's not the same this week. But the weird thing was, I was going to think about looking at Cleopatra's tomb to try and sort of bring Egypt into the Roman world. And strangely enough, they found some coins in the past few days that are directly linked to Cleopatra. So I thought that was quite odd. 2 days ago, there's this update about coins being associated with Cleopatra. So we're going to mention that, and wherever we go with that, that's fine. So tonight we're looking at Sparta and seeing how Sparta sort of brings us into the Roman world narrative. So, Goff, anything you'd like to say?
No.
I've probably already asked him. I'm going a bit off. Right. Margaret.
Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I've got no news. No news. Where have you gone? Oh, there you are. But I've got a question.
Oh, right. Look. Right. Yes, I was in Downton Abbey 3. Yes, I was shearing a sheep, and it was 20 minutes before the end. That's that done. Anything else, Margaret?
Yeah, I went for a walk last week and I saw a big old yew tree, and there was a plaque next to it saying, telling you all about yew trees, and it was saying that a wooden spear was found in Clacton that was 400,000 years old.
Hang on a minute. What the hell's that got to do with the yew tree?
Because it was made of yew. And this is the question. They reckon it's 400,000 years old. Obviously, there was no wood left. It would have been just the indentation of the spear. How did they know it was yew? Would it have had an imprint of the bark?
I got to be honest with you. The finds at Clacton, which give rise to the term Clactonian flint knapping technology. But in all the years I've been doing this archaeology, right, that's new on me. I've just not come across. I've not come across that before. I got to be honest with you, and which is not like me, but that's a new one. But if I want to sort of think about this from my point of view, where we're excavating in West Wales, we've got 2 layers of burnt wood. We've got 2 layers of charcoal. So the first top layer of charcoal, we've got small bits of wood, and obviously the diameters are small, so we can probably start to assume that probably represents sort of hazel, and it is probably to do with structural watland daub and so on. So obviously you go a bit deeper in the context, and you've got obvious bits of oak, and that's more, substantial. So that's from my point of view. So what they're going to be looking for is structural evidence of the imprint from the yew. Yew is very specific, and it's got a set signature, and an impression would be pertinent in the archaeology. But to say it's actually a piece of yew, an imprint of yew 400,000 years ago is pushing it a bit. I need more information on that.
Oh, well, I've got a photograph of it. I'll get it in a minute.
Oh my God, how can you? Right, Will.
Hello.
Nice to have you on board.
Thank you very much.
So Will, I've just mentioned that I mentioned it's Rumney, isn't it? Rumney, Cardiff.
Well, I was born in Pontlottyn and spent significant time in Rumney at the top of the Rumney Valley.
Rumney Valley. Okay, not the other Rumney. Okay, fair enough.
Yes, and I'm resident in Canada. I'm back here in Ottawa 6 years. I came to Canada firstly in '76, went back to Wales for a period, and I've been back here just over six years. So my interest is in history in general. I have, if I can do a bit of promotional, I have
Go for it.
my own YouTube channel called Rumney Virtual Tours and Rumney Virtual Tours International and Global. And I've extracted information from the National Library of Wales of the newspaper clippings from 1840 up to about 1875, 1876. I've used Google Earth to do on-site visitations and using the backdrops to my videos. I've named every soldier on the Rumney War Memorial with their history of unit, number, the background, and using ancestry linked all their families. And I've done that.
My God!
So quite a bit of video creation. I'm also an author. I've written 2 books, which are not necessarily selling very well, but one about global warming and the other one based on historical context, which are both on Amazon. And I've been writing poetry since 1976. I have my own website, willgeorgepoet.co.uk, and I've got a couple hundred poems there, but I've written about 500 poems in 70 years, and I'm 72, knocking on the door. So that's it. Been around for a while.
Oh, you're not but a young un.
Fantastic, but there's one thing that you completely missed out. That your interest in Gethley Gaia, and you mentioned about Gethley Gaia, the Roman site excavated by Sir Mortimer Wheeler in the 1920s, and there's also another archaeologist who worked there, which you will be aware of. But the one thing about it's you wanted to sort of bring sort of Gethley Gaia, the Roman site, back alive again. The only problem is we're up against a very shoddy organization like CADU, which doesn't really seem to care and put its funding in the right places to have its history and archaeology sold properly. So yes, and I'm in a little bit of trouble from that because I'm not allowed to criticize CADU on the internet because I've already been spoken to by the police about it. But then again, why not? Right. Okay, let's crack on. So what I'd like to do is look at some image. Thanks for that, George. I'd like to look at some images in regards to Sparta. And one of the things that I'm doing, and yesterday and today, because I was on 2 separate film productions. I remember today I actually gave a load of actors a lecture whilst we were waiting, and I was saying that we're looking at the Roman period because they said, "Oh, you're an archaeologist as well." I said, "Yeah." So we're looking at the Roman period, and I said we're doing it in a different way. We're looking at the different bits of what later become the Roman world, to sort of give an idea of what Rome's about. And there was this one boy who was sitting in the corner who was like a historian. He said, "You're completely correct." And I believe that that's the right approach. And I thought, oh, I must be doing something correct. So I thought we could look at Sparta today just to sort of, think about that and where that goes in our minds. And the first thing we think about Sparta is sort of a warrior class of people. Like looking at lots of these miniature worlds and peoples and so on, it's like the Dacians and the Etruscans and the Carthaginians and the Phoenicians. It's very difficult to give more than just give an overview. but it sort of gives an insight. And one of the issues with all of this is that if you think of the Roman world as a mix of bits of worlds, the Roman world in many ways is not one thing. It's not Rome. Rome doesn't represent Rome. It represents this great world that it's sort of dragged in. Bits of Egypt, bits of France, bits of Spain, bits of Mauritania, bits of where modern day Israel is. All these bits coming. And even bits of Germanicus. All these and bits of Britain. So all these things come in. So when you get a structure of the Roman world, you've got to know what makes up the Roman world. And I think one of the big failings when people are looking at the Roman world is not allowing people to understand how Rome is and where it thinks and why it made the decisions, for example, in Roman era Britain, and the mistakes that historians make when they look at Roman era Britain. Those sort of challenging that sort of narrative that Rome never really left. They stayed here, and you've got the Christianity narrative and stuff. So how does all that come into the thinking? So anyway, let's look at some images. Where's my images? Sharing the screen, and bingo. Let's do it. And thanks, guys. There's a lot of people away tonight, and Henry's given his apologies. I don't know where our two usual girls are on a Wednesday, but they're not with us tonight. So let's think of there. Now, I just thought that looks very like Thessalonica, but it's not. So that's basically the spit of southern Greece, and to give you an idea where we are precisely, is that, oh, hang on, I think where's my image to sort of show us where we are in Greece? Right, there we are. So there it is. This is sort of the area that we're thinking of. We're interested in that bit that says Sparta there on the map. So and it's quite unusual. It's there. It sort of sticks out as being quite a dominant sort of area. You've got Athens there, and you sort of the map, and you got Macedonia, and you think about the likes of Alexander the Great and Philip II. And when we get into understanding what this world is about, it's trying to sort of get into the mind of a people that really set the sort of the idea of warriors and so on in the sort of mindset of sort of Europe onwards. So one thing that we know about Sparta is this sort of the founding of the Spartan world. And one thing that I've not said is that lots of these mini powerful civilizations seem to happen around 3,000 years ago. So we're looking at sort of coming into the foundations of the Carthaginian world. So obviously North Africa, we're then thinking somewhere around the 900 years BC. We're thinking about the Etruscans, and we're thinking about the area where they are in Tuscany. Obviously 753 BC is the foundation of Rome. But we think about the Phoenicians, who've been darting around for a few years up until 900 years BC. And we look at the Spartans, who roughly seem to come around 900 years BC as well. And then you look a bit further north off this map, sort of up towards the right-hand side, you look at the likes much further north. You look at the likes of the Dacians, and obviously further north, just off that map, you've got the Thracians. And all of these people were sort of roughly around 3,000 years ago. So that's really, really, there's really fitting time. So if we look at another map that I've actually got, which is there it is. This map here. One of the things about the Spartans is that they've become lost in the Athenian world, because we always think about Athens, and we think about the war, the Peloponnesian War, that was a 30-odd year war from 431-ish into about 404 BC between Sparta and Athens, and there's all these sort of little states that come together and bear and fighting and all these other things. So Sparta was the principal enemy of Athens, and eventually Athens would be the ones that after some time would dominate the Mediterranean. However, at the Battle of Agio Spartami in 405 BC, it was actually a Spartan victory. But eventually, the ideas that were enshrined in sort of the Spartan mindset would eventually be the Greeks conquering the likes of the Spartans in a great victory of the Athenians over the Spartans in what's referred to as the Battle of Lycatra in 371 BC. But one of the things that we make sure that we're doing with these presentations about ancient Rome is try to not get lost in dates. Let's not sort of go there. But one of the key things. So we're going to go back to that other colourful map, and this is something that we've not mentioned at all. Let's go to the other map. So move away from Sparta just a moment, and all of that stuff there. Well, not so much the red stuff, but all the sort of purpley stuff was eventually conquered by Rome in the year 146 BC. And that's really important to talk about that, because when Rome was capturing most of the purpley stuff and lots of bits of the red stuff as well on that map, in the year 146 BC, Rome itself brings in the idea of Greece, brings in sort of this sort of Greek mantle in the way it looks at its religion, in the way it looks at its education, and so on and so on. So that's a really key date, 146 BC. However, when we think and we go through the understanding of Sparta, it's Sparta itself. Just think about some other words, right? Sparta itself had a constitution. Yes, it did. Constitution. It's got a really interesting social system. They got their laws, and they got sort of they got their legislators and all the rest of it. And it's quite weird using those words when we're talking about all the other civilizations that we've mentioned, such as the Carthaginians and such as the Etruscans. So we're using words like constitution, which is really interesting. So one of the key things when we think about Sparta is the images of the warriors, right? So this is a really important thing, and sort of, yes, images of warriors, there they go, love them, and the typical sort of indications of what Spartan warriors may look like or what Spartan warriors don't look like, and one of the things about Spartan society is that they're a military society. They're purely a military society. Well, you could say, some historians say, well, don't say they're purely a military society, but the military side of who they are and the masculinity is key to understanding the sense of who they are. And it's very different from say the Roman world, and it's very different from the Etruscan world. So we look at the Etruscans only having a little bit of a military there to just deal with a couple of things. The Romans have got a big military, but they don't sort of instrument the world of who they are as Spartans, specifically as people who are warriors. And this is one of the things. So So from the age of 7, Spartanian class boys would run through and start to think about a sense of warfare and fighting, and it was known agoge. So agoge was something where boys from the age of 7 were trained to be warriors, right? And this is the point. They were trained to be a warrior class. This is why we get images like this. But we've got to remember that women are very, very important in this Spartan society. So from the agoge, it's called the agoge, as I say. So from the age of 7 all the way through to sort of their early 20s, the boys would be deprived of food and sleep and shelter to sort of build up their sense of becoming military warriors. These were a warrior class. But not only would they be involved in a rich military training, where they would face tests of dealing with pain tolerance. Obviously, the pain tolerance of not eating, the pain tolerance of not sleeping, the pain tolerance of, living out in the open air and having to keep yourself warm when it's freezing cold, that type of thing. So they would be very much into hunting, dancing, singing, sort of rhetorical understandings of being able to sort of look at the world from different aspects and points of view. It only gets better, guys, because these people, these warriors, would face ritual beating, right? So I'm just sort of having a little titter to myself. You could think about this as a sadomasochistic society where boys would be forced to be violent. They were forced to be warriors. They were forced to get into their inner demons and to sort of bring that out, to be competitive. Boys were being forced to be intensely competitive in this sense, the agoge. This is something very different that in many ways, lots of historians are telling us about this, rather than the archaeology bearing out the sense of this, but how they are within their society. And it only goes to show something that I discussed today with the group of other actors, that when your society is based upon one pure sense of doing one thing and being seen in that way, your society will eventually collapse. Unlike where you've got Rome, that seems to drag in loads of things and has got this world that lasts many, many years. So boys were encouraged to use violence against each other. So that's the historian Plutarch, who's writing roughly around AD 100. This sort of Plutarch was like a Greek writer within the sort of Roman world, and Plutarch's sort of giving us, he's telling us that these Spartans, this warrior class, would be instrumental in sexual violence, not just towards women, but towards other men, right? But sometimes it's thought that what does that actually mean? So participants were required to live in the open or in sort of barracks, and were restricted from contact with birth families or wives. So this is a really, really sort of weird world. It's a very interesting but very odd world, and lots of the Spartans, it's almost as if the Spartans would make themselves elite. They would make themselves sort of very the very, very sort of elitist sort of society again. And women, this is rather interesting. Listen to this. Women received a state-sponsored education. Did I just say that? So women received a sense of they had a state-sponsored education. Now this is, when you think about that, it's being sponsored by the state that women were educated, right? And you tried to put that in our mindset, and girls really weren't going to school until the late Victorian period in Britain, right? But way back in Sparta, you had girls being educated. It was very, very interesting sort of world. But there were sort of there were worlds within worlds in regards to the sense of the Spartans. You can there's different sort of classes, and there's sort of different ways of looking at it. Just think and use there was a slave class, there was an elite class, and so on. But free Spartan women enjoyed considerably more rights than elsewhere in classical antiquity, and it's something different that we don't really sort of understand about this world in the Mediterranean. That you suddenly got these weird sort of this weird Spartan world, and you've got these women who are receiving, the free women, not the slave class, but these sort of the free women enjoyed this sort of education. But hang on a minute. But when we're something's just happened. Are we still looking at my images? Yeah. Got it.
Yep.
Good. But the lower classes in the Spartan world are sort of constantly sort of rebelling, and there's oddness. There's obviously the slave class and the sort of elite class and so on. The one problem looking at these sort of little bits of history, diving in there and trying to really understand, so is you can't really do a hell of a lot in these sessions, because looking at the whole Spartan world is months worth of study. But thinking that women had some rights in the Spartan world that you don't see anywhere else, and that's really important. So when you if you want to compare Spartan women, sort of, if you want to think about Spartan women roughly about 400 years BC, and you want to compare that with Roman women, say, I don't know, 200 years AD, Roman women just didn't have any rights. It was quite shocking when, in fact, 600 years earlier, Spartan women, educated Spartan women, particularly if they were in the elite and they were in the upper classes, right? They had the sense of freedom, and 600 years later, in the Roman world, women really don't have any real levels of freedom. That's the classes. This is so the lower. This is the weird thing in the Roman world. The lower class women had some more rights than the elite women in the Roman world. So that's one thing. But if we want to compare like for like, Spartan women 400 years BC to Roman women AD 200 in the same elite class. In the Roman world, women didn't really have much to look forward to. But the lower classes, women, the lower classes in the Roman world, women saw to be a little bit more freer than the upper classes, which is quite odd. So again, thinking into the archaeology and thinking, sort of trying to understand the archaeology, that's where we are, trying to sort of understand all this, and sort of, this is where the sort of art takes us. We're looking at sort of women as being, protected by the men in the society, which is probably maybe where it should be. And if we do think a little bit more about the archaeology, and we sort of go through this will sort of help us understand where we are. And then I want us to think about something else which is really important in regards to the Mediterranean and the Greek world, which is something that helps us understand, for example, where we got the emergence of these people. You know, we get the emergence of the Etruscans, and we get the emergence of the Spartans, and so on. But roughly sort of 900 years BC. But relatively, that's described throughout the Mediterranean as the Dark Ages. It's not as dark when you use those terms, Dark Ages, as we think it is. So let's. This is when we look at the Spartan world, it's a bit like looking for needles in a haystack. And the theatre of ancient Sparta. So if we look, there it is, Sparta on the map. So we've got theatre and the archaeology of this period, and a word that we don't use and we haven't used up until now: classical. This is the classical period. This is the period of classic Greece. But when you think about classic Greece, you think about Athens and Parthenon, and you think about all the temples there and so on. That's what you think about classical Greece, and you think about the classical orders of Greece. You think about the Doric, Ionic, and then the Romans have their own classical bit of the period. That's the Corinthian order. When we try and really understand what's going on, and I do believe that the little interruption a few minutes ago was because Anne was trying to get on, and I don't know what the hell she was doing, but that's life. I'll try and get hold of her after the break. So archaeology of the classical period, particularly in regards to Sparta. So she got all these localities mentioned there, and Sparta, Laconia. You think about moving further up and you're sort of outside the Pinky area. So suppose the city of Sparta to be deserted and nothing left but the temples and the ground plan. Distant ages would be very unwilling to believe that the power of these people was at all equal to their fame. When we think about Sparta, it's said their city is not built continuously and has no splendid temples or other edifices that you can actually really see on the ground, other than a few bits and pieces that we've got a couple of images there. It rather resembles a group of villages like the poorest levels of society. But when you think about how the Spartans lived and how they trained and wanted to be out in the open and sort of, the Spartans weren't like lots of these other worlds. They didn't need to build large cities to be powerful. Now that's a really interesting point. That is a really, really interesting point. When we think about power and we think about the Mediterranean, this is so let's sort of understand what I've just said, right? I think it's about time we sort of balanced what we know and what we've looked at. So we're still trying to work out the Thracian world, but we're Thracia, northern Macedonia, going into over towards the Asian side of that, and we go a little bit into Turkey, and sort of we go up to the foothills of Romania, and we get the Dacians, and we think about what are the Dacians about, and we're thinking about lots of wealth and lots of important people and sort of how they are within the world. But if we want to move and understand where the balance is with all of this, so when we look at the Etruscan world, we don't see much in the way of buildings left from the Etruscan world, except some of the walls around some of the old Etruscan cities that were once Etruscan cities, but we don't really find temples in the main, and we don't really find much in the way of evidence from the Etruscan world above the surface. They were absorbed by the Roman world, and the last of the Etruscan world in Tuscany had died out by the year 87 years BC. And then we want to compare to the likes of Tunisia, the Carthaginians, and we think that most of what the Carthaginian world has been demolished, has been destroyed. We looked at that and we're thinking, okay. And then we sort of move to the likes of trying to find evidence of the Phoenicians. Obviously, the Phoenicians was these sort of people who went around, like the Olmecs. They weren't great sort of civilization builders. They would like to move their stuff here and there, and sort of what are we going to find in regards to the Phoenicians? And then we look at looking at the Roman world, and we look at the Greek world, not the Spartans, because the Greeks would eventually absorb the Spartan world. But when we think about, it's almost as if the Greeks, Athens, the Romans, Rome, want to build big, but the Spartans didn't. This is what all that was about. The Spartans didn't. So if we want to then compare to the likes of ancient Egypt just built things and more people building things, and you've got pyramids everywhere. Nearly 100 pyramids now that we do believe existed in ancient Egypt once. And we think about the great temples at Thebes in ancient Egypt, and we think about Alexandria, and we think about all these wonderful, great places in ancient Egypt, Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens, and all these things. So the ancient Egyptians sort of built things, but they in a way they were building it for other reasons. They were building it it's a very difficult one, when we think about the ancient Egyptians, they've been there for a longer time, so they're just building things, and lots of their stuff in the deserts have survived. When you think about what problem is in archaeology, what we do is we compare civilizations like for like, and we think, if there's something very important to this now, it's coming up. When we look at civilizations, we like to see big temples. We like to see big bits of archaeology, right? And you get it in Rome, and you get it in Athens, but then you don't get it in Britain. And this is a key point. We can't really think of Rome and Britain as a great builder of monuments, because that's simply not the case anymore. We used to think back in Roman Britain, there we go. We used to think that the Romans built roads everywhere. They didn't. They simply didn't, because they already existed. We think that the Romans built all these massive cities and towns and stuff. Well, when we start to look at the massive cities and towns, most of what survives of them, like the wall at Caliveratabatum, and like the wall at the likes of the wall at Ventus Ilurum, Caerwent, if you take away the walls, then we don't have much in the middle of these cities, because they don't have these great temples that we see in Athens and Misenum and Sicily and so on. And this is the way we need to look at the Spartans. You don't have to be a great people who have left a mark on history to be remembered in the form of temples and theatres. You can be remembered in the acts and deeds, and what historians tell us. So across this sort of land, across this land of the Spartans, the great city, the Spartan city of Sparta, theatre, of which, however, little showed above ground except portions of the retaining walls. And then you've got the Temple of Leonidas, a quadrangular building, perhaps a temple, constructed of immense blocks of stone and containing 2 chambers and the foundations of an ancient bridge. And that's basically what survives. that, and you're thinking, oh, that's not a lot to show for a civilization, is it? And in many ways, what's happening is the Romans are coming into these places, right, and they're sort of doing their own mark on these places. So when we do think about the Roman world, we think about the earlier worlds that may have been there. The Romans have just gone in and sort of either removed it, or what they're building is what they're building. And we've got to remember that the Romans are building a new world. They're building an empire. The Spartans are not building an empire. In many ways, the Greeks are not building an empire. Carthaginians want to build an empire. They really do. The Egyptians not really building an empire either. The Dacians not really building an empire. So they don't need these great cities. So when you're into the mind of Rome, what you are seeing is that the reason why the Romans are building big off buildings is because they want you to see that they are everything to you, and everything around you is the true embodiment of you being a Roman, because you got the Roman stuff there. When you look at Trajan's column, and I say to people, when you look, for example, at Rome, you've got only 5% the ancient Roman city, 5 to 10%, the ancient Roman city standing today. But just think what Rome would have once looked like. But Sparta never looked like that, right? Even the Carthaginian cities didn't look like that. Rome was something else. Rome was taking everything it could to be the greatest thing ever, but not in Britain. And there's a big reason for that, because Rome wasn't here long enough. So when one of the things that we've got to be very wary of is how we see archaeology. Not all archaeology is to be seen in the same way, right? Archaeology is massively biased, hugely biased. I use this example that I've used a number of times. There was a bunch of archaeologists in North Africa after the Second World War, and they found this beautiful Roman temple. And they said, "Oh, we're not interested in this Roman temple. We're interested in the Greek temple." So they blew the Roman temple up, right? And they removed it all just to get to scattering ruins of a Greek temple underneath. So in lots of ways, when we think and we look at archaeology, it's extremely biased. It's down to who's excavating it, right? So when we Williams, I mentioned William about Getli Gaia earlier on, and thinking, Getli Gaia should become a showpiece of the Roman world, whether that's right or wrong. But to what extent do we display the past, which is primarily Roman in Britain? We even when we do that, there's not a massive amount of Roman stuff around. So what we've done in Britain is that we've wanted to be focused on the likes of Hadrian's Wall and Verroconium Wroxeter and the theatre at Diva Chester and the Great Walls on the east coast of the shore forts on the east coast, the Roman shore forts on the east coast, and like Porchester and the great sort of the two lighthouses at Dover. So we focused on this at the deficit of other archaeology that's out there that should have been given equal footing. So when we think again back to our map, and we think about Sparta, and we think about, it's only in more recent years that people have been looking at Sparta as an archaeological world, where people have been looking at Rome as an archaeological world for many years, and they've been excavating at Pompeii and Herculaneum. So when we're do you see the problem that we've got in the world of archaeology? If we've got the likes of Herculaneum, we've got the likes of Pompeii, and we're trying to compare it with the Spartans, and we're trying to compare it with the Carthaginians, there's no competition, right? Herculaneum and Pompeii is going to win every single time, and that gives us a massive bias in the archaeology. So they've been excavating this city of Sparta, and they've been excavating, trying to look at the Spartan world really from the 1900s onwards. and obviously it's sometimes at the detriment of wanting to find more, when in fact wanting to find more from theatres like Sparta, like the theatre at Sparta, is down to disappointment in lots of ways, because it's not ever going to be compared with the Roman world, because it's never going to be as great as the Roman world. But Sparta didn't survive. Sparta was a distant memory by the time the Romans had taken over the Greek world in the 140s BC. So what we're resting assured is to see the hope that we can start to look at all the little indicators of what eventually made up the world that dominated the Mediterranean landscape, which is the Roman world. And obviously, by the foundations of the Roman world are, in fact, all these little civilizations that we've been looking at. So, I'm one of the things that would be an interesting sort of concept to sort of try and put across today, right? While still looking at Sparta, do you know what? We've hardly done any of Sparta, right? But we just sort of giving you a little idea. So I think this will link in with what I've already said, and about the prehistoric Dark Ages. And it's a cop out. It really is. When we don't know about history, and we struggle to work out where everything is, we've got Dark Ages, right? So we've got we've got a Dark Ages in Britain, right? We all know when that is, sometime in the 400s all the way to 1066. And then I turn around and say, well, what about the beautiful carvings in Scotland? Picts, think of them. What about all those wonderful sort of developing churches in Cymru, Wales? What about all that stuff? It's not that dark, is it? What about these illuminated manuscripts? It can't be that dark, right? But you got a Dark Ages in the Mediterranean, which is that. And when we chuck into the mix, and we're gonna do a little bit of Cleopatra today as well. We're gonna think about this little thing that I mentioned earlier on. I thought, well, okay, wow, let's look at Cleopatra. And I thought, wow, that would be an interesting thing. And we see this article on which has just been developed the past couple of days, and we're thinking again, okay, whilst all that stuff is going on, in sort of a dark world that we don't really understand what's going on in the Mediterranean, ancient Greece is still going, ancient Egypt still going, So again, sort of looking at this world, sometime we're sort of talking about roughly around 3,200 years ago to sometime about 500 years BC, right? 600, 500 years BC. You've got what's referred to as the Dark Ages in this world, and then suddenly you've got the Spartans that seem to sort of be doing everything in the 400s. But this is one thing about history. There's no such thing as the Dark Ages. It's a complete anathema, right? It doesn't happen, and this is a really important point. When all these things have been going on, and they've been chugging away in the background, and they've been going, right, we're gonna have the Carthaginians, we're gonna have the Phoenicians, we're gonna have the Hispanic people, we're gonna even have the Germanic people. Where do all these people develop from? And so they can't really be a sense of the Dark Ages. Lots of people talk about it. But what it is, the reason why we usually talk about the Dark Ages is that we think, well, what are people doing for these few hundred years here and there? What is exactly going on? What exactly happened at the end of the likes of the Mycenaeans? What's going on 3,200 years ago? What is actually happening? And one of the missing people on this map are the Macedonians. You know, the Macedonians are huge. We haven't really mentioned them. We haven't mentioned Alexander the Great and Philip II. We're going to have to dabble into Philip II and Alexander the Great. And I just mention that a little bit about that. You know, we've just got such a powerful history that we can't give the Romans the credit for, because even the sense of the suspended flooring, the hypercore system, for bathing, that technology come from the Greeks. And so, well, what did the Romans actually achieve other than building massive cities based upon everything that they had subjugated and conquered? That is the point. It's like putting the best of these things together. And when and there's something massive about all this as well, that we look at this Mediterranean world and we think about great writers like Herodotus, who's writing in the 400s. Herodotus. When I say the earlier 400s, you're talking about the 480s, the 490s, that type of time, and you're thinking, right, so it goes the other way around. Remember, so when it's something that's really missing is that when we link in with something last week, so we got Thrace here, which is on the map, and we look at the Thracians last week, and I mentioned last week the Thracians, and I mentioned the Trojans, and I mentioned the Trojan War, and I mentioned a tiny bit of Agamemnon, and mentioned the Mycenaean, the Mycenae, right? And then you're talking about the Mycenaeans, and you're trying to get the history together, and you're thinking about the likes of Homer's Iliad, and you're thinking about all the Odyssey, and you're thinking about all these different things, and this sort of great war that the Thracians were actually on the side of the Trojans, fighting those damnable sort of people on that side, the sort of Greek world. And it sometimes it's sold to us a lot that it's a lot of myth and legend and sort of made up, but lots of it is based on a lot of fact, right? And let me make that a little bit more clearer, right? The biggest problem in archaeology is excavating an archaeological site and not understanding it, right? So what you do, you think, right, okay, we've got layers, we've got stuff in it. How do we understand it? Oh, we don't understand it, so this is the Dark Ages, right? Except when you get the likes of Flinders Petrie, and he's excavating in the Negev Desert in Egypt in the 1880s, 1890s, he's got the same problem. And he thinks, right, okay, we've got all this archaeology, we've got this pottery that we don't understand it. So what we're going to do, we're going to use a method of seriation, things that are older are simpler, and things that are more modern have got handles and stuff on and more ornate, right? So you move away from this concept of the Dark Ages. And the point is, you can't have a Dark Ages in the ancient Greek world if you've got the likes of Agamemnon, and you've got the likes of Hector, and you've got the likes of the horse at the gates of Troy, and you're just thinking, well, it can't be dark. This is the thing. When we don't understand history, we say it's a dark world. And let's go back to the Spartans. So this legendary Spartan history, if we look at the 900 years BC, and they've got their Peloponnese there, that sort of bit that sticks out at the bottom, and that contain both fantastic and possibly historical elements in their mythology and their sense of their storytelling. And we're thinking of a sense of proto-historical information. Oh, and there's something else I need to chuck in here, guys, right? This is going to screw our minds up, right? Let's screw our minds up. Technically, yeah, all this stuff going on in Greece, all this stuff going on with Troy and Agamemnon and Mycenae and Sparta and the Thracians and then the developing Macedonians and all these things is actually occurring on the backdrop of something that we would refer to in Britain as the Bronze Age. Can you see there's a lot of conflicted things going on here? So if we refer to yes, we refer to the ancient, if we refer to all this stuff going on in the 900s, 800s, 700s, and still until we're actually building the Parthenon in the 450s BC and all the rest of it, as like the Bronze Age, right? But in our Bronze Age, we've got no writing, right? In Britain, we've got no writing, but they're still referring to this as the Bronze Age. So the problem is, in history, it's all about trying to unravel the actual things that are real, right? What things are real is that everything that we're seeing developing is developing into the histories and the archaeologies that we've been looking at for the past months. And the problem is, so, I mentioned, Homer's Iliad, but then we go to Herodotus, who then, totally away from Homer's Iliad, he basically says, Herodotus is the one who's writing about the likes of the Spartans. And he said actually, and unlike Plutarch, here we go, who's writing in the 50s AD, Herodotus is writing in the 400s BC, and he's sort of saying about the Spartans, who are actually the enemies of the people who are looking after Herodotus. So what's happening is Herodotus is saying, look, the Spartans, there we go, they're lawless people. They're always in civil strife. They're always fighting. Of course they're bloody fighting, because it's their culture. They're bound to fight. It's like saying today, people who go out to see rugby, they're thugs and sure, don't comment. People who go out and see who watch rugby, they're thugs. All those people from Ireland and Scotland and England and Wales and France, they're all thugs because they watch rugby. Lots of these people are educated people, and they run businesses and stuff. But it's still a rough game. The Spartan world is a rough world. It is what's going on. It is what it is. Oh my God, I've used that word. It is what it is. I didn't want to use that one. And have we? Do you remember that story? Of Thermopylae? Yeah, we know that one. We can talk a little bit about the Battle of Thermopylae, right? We can think about King Leonidas, yeah, who had 300 full Spartans. The thing about this, right? The one thing that we know about the ancient Greek world is total hypocrisy. One minute they're slagging off these Spartans, but in fact, it was the Spartans that were saving the Greek world from the bloody Persians. But that's the Greeks for you. One minute they like the Spartans, and the next minute they're fighting them. And the Spartans defeat the Greeks, and then eventually the Greeks defeat the Spartans, and end of Sparta, right? So when we're thinking about, when we're thinking about all of this, is that roughly in about, look at that guy there, where he's coming in, and they got their own little navy as well. We don't think about the Spartans, the V, the V. That's the V of Sparta. So about 500 years BC, Sparta had it had a citizen class, the higher sort of echelons of that, right? It's sort of Sparta itself had 35,000 citizens, and obviously, it's lower classes as well. The Helots, the lower classes. We could explain about all the Helots and the Perikoi, right? But we haven't got time. Stuff gets mixed. But the thing is, the likely total, right? The likely total of Sparta, the city of Sparta, right? A population of 50,000 people, right, makes Sparta the biggest city, right, in this sort of Greek world, right, going all the way from all the way from Peloponnese, all the way to the Gulf of Corinth, all the way sort of up there, Athens, Mycenae, and then going all the way up to Macedonia, up to Thracia. This is the biggest place. This is huge. But this was 500 years BC, right? But only within 70 years, it's said that Athens had a population. Now, this is another interesting figure. Athens had a population up to 600,000 people 70 years later, in the 430, right? 600,000 people, making Athens one of the biggest cities in the whole world at that stage, right? But let's talk about these Spartans. And you know what? We all like a good war, don't we? So we might look at Thermopylae, and we might talk a little bit about the Battle of Thermopylae, and we're sort of these warriors. They looked very different depending on who they are. And look at their beards. Who would go out with a man like that? And by the way, guys, I've had to have a shave, and I've had to have my hair done twice over the past 2 days, and my nose is looking awfully red, but that's something else. But in the year 480, and we'll have a break after this. In the year 480, a small force led by King Leonidas, 300 full Spartans, 700 Thespians. No, not actors. No, not Thespians, but Thespians, and 400 Thebans. And basically, there was this sort of great battle at Thermopylae. And there was an army led by Xerxes, the Persian leader. And it's the first time we've mentioned the Persians. So we're going to have to do a lot about the Persians as well. There's so much to go, guys. We haven't even stepped foot in Britain, but we will eventually sometime, So when we step foot in Britain, we know what's in those minds. And, right, it needs to be said that this world that I can remember when I was a young lad watching television programs and on the old BBC in the early 1980s. There was this world told about Rome. Rome would turn up and there would be these teachers, and they wouldn't tell us that they were Greek teachers. They would just say there was these Roman teachers, and they would bring us Latin, and they would bring us the story of Rome's foundation, right? But that couldn't be so far away from the truth, even if we tried. It was people from around the Roman world educating. It wasn't the Romans educating about the Roman world. It was the Greek Roman educating about the Roman world. Or it would be these great scholars from Delphi, in Turkey, not Delphi in Turkey, no. Temple of Athena in Turkey. Sorry, wrong place. Delphi's in Greece. And you might get Ephesus. You might get these sort of learned people from Ephesus, again in Turkey, and you get these Greeks from mainland Greece. And these are the people who are going out telling us about the Roman world, but they're not Roman, they're Greek. So this is the hodgepodge of what the Roman world's like. So they're telling stories about all these things. They would be telling the story about Thermopylae, right? And the Greeks never liked the Spartans, but again, it was the Spartans who saved Greece. So again, that would be a nice little interesting story to have a look at, and we've got to mention earthquakes, and the reason why, when people go to Sparta and they try to find the great ruins that the city should be, and they don't find it, is because there's been violent earthquakes and Sparta has been shaken down to the ground, and the buildings are not there because they were ruined. by the tremors that come from the Corinth, the sort of the Gulf of Corinth. And, you know, so again, these things explain lots of the missing information. Right, so we're gonna take a break, and then sooner or later we will look at a little bit about Cleopatra's final secret. Documentary reveals hundreds of coins and port found in Egypt, but does that mean Cleopatra was buried there? I'm loving that, because it's like and that was actually broadcast on National Geographic Channel September the 25th at 10 p.m. Entitled Cleopatra's Final Secret. Oh, hang on. We haven't had the 25th of September yet, have we? I don't even know what day it is. Oh, that's today, isn't it? Hang on a minute. I'll go check the day. Right. Yes, the 25th is tomorrow. So what we're going to tell you about Cleopatra's Final Secret is actually on the National Geographic Channel tomorrow at 10 p.m. How topical are we today? So let's get off this and get over myself, and then let's just see where we are. Stop. Let's have a break. And hasn't even joined us. Pat, could you do me a favor? Could you phone Anne in the break and just tell her where the hell she was? She was phoning in rather than joining the class.
Okay, will do.
But don't do it yet. We're going to find out if there's any questions. So we want to do the Battle of Thermopylae. We've got to do it. It's got to be chucked that in there. It's got to be done, right? And we love a bit of fighting. Well, hang on a minute. We can't not do the Battle of Thermopylae, right? And then you get an idea, right? You get an idea of why the Romans later on feel that that they can't be defeated, right? And you get this idea that Rome can never be defeated because they get these ideas of Leonidas, and they get the Battle of Thermopylae in their mind, and they're marching into battle and they can't be defeated. But the real fact is that the Romans were defeated many times. And you look at the Teutoburg forest in AD 9, and you look at Varus's the emperor Tiberius would cry in his halls, "Bring back my legions, Varus!" He would cry that he'd lost because Arminius was probably likely to have met Tiberius, and because Arminius, this leader of the Germanic tribe, who actually eventually defeats Varus, and he was actually trained by Rome. And this is one thing I keep telling people, right? The only thing that can destroy Rome is Rome. It's the only thing that can bring down Rome is Rome. Every single time. What destroyed Rome was Rome, right? Then you could argue, actually, Greece, not Greece. The Persians destroyed Rome, but no, they didn't, because it was just the Romans didn't want, the Persians didn't want to come any further than Istanbul. You know, they were happy there, right? But they were constantly fighting the Romans. But in the rest of the Roman world, what was continuing bringing down Rome was Rome. And we think of Alaric in AD 410. He was trained by the Romans. He was a sort of a pseudo-Roman general, and he captured Rome. Ordovicius was the guy who finally brought Rome to its knees in AD 476. All people who were fighting for Rome. So to know yourself, it knows your weaknesses to be able to destroy yourself. Right. So there you go. Right. So Margaret.
Well, you tend to think of the Greeks being very civilized, and they loved their art and they loved their philosophies. So these guys were completely different with their military aspects, weren't they? Their austerity and their simplicity, different way of life completely.
If you want to do a comparison, then you think about the Templar Knights, right? And you think about the Knights of St. John. They had a vow of poverty, but they were exceedingly rich in many other ways. You could say that they were very wealthy. They were money lenders and so on. But you know, that's why we got Friday the 13th in the year 1307, with the likes of the Order of St. John needing to be dissolved and all the rest of it because of loans. But if we want to go back to the reality, and it was the 13th of October, by the way, the one thing that we need to do is look at history more pragmatically. It's not wealth and buildings are not necessarily a status of a great civilization. Many other things can be the status of a great civilization, like the Etruscans. We don't see these massive temples and stuff with the Etruscans, but we know what the Etruscans created in Tuscany far outweighed anything that Rome offered us in regards to the likes of the way that the Etruscans were so civilized. So you've got to see all these indicators and markers. And one thing, these were so different from the idea of Greece, right? They when we think about Mount Olympus and we think about the modern foundations for the Olympic Games, we think about all that, and we think about Greece. We don't think about the Spartans. Who the hell are the Spartans? And we think about this and what the Spartans are about. The Spartans are the saviors of the Western world. If it wasn't for the Spartans, the Persians would have taken over the whole of Greece, right? And that's life, isn't it? So just Leonidas defeating the Persians and Xerxes, and so when I say defeating them, he held them off. So that's more like it. So in the mental sense, it's defeating, right? It wasn't actually a victory on the Spartan side, but morally it was a victory. So there we go. Well, we're going to do that after the break. So more about that then. Right, Goff, anything to say?
I'm just wondering where we're getting all the information from about Sparta.
Yes, the information for Sparta is coming from some friendly historians and some historians that didn't like the Spartans. Most of the historians who wrote about Sparta were Greek. So it's a bit like having two Julius Caesars. One Julius Caesar doesn't like the other Julius Caesar, so he says that Julius Caesar was a complete failure and he didn't actually invade Britain. And the other Julius Caesar says he did invade Britain. So we got to look in the middle and say, well, he must have done this and he must have done that, but he didn't do that, So that's the way we've got to look at it. Right. Thank you for that, Goff. Richard.
Yeah, very interesting subject.
Good.
Whether we'll it's just trying to get the truth.
Exactly.
It's so long ago. There's nothing sort of. It's very difficult to try and. I'm not having the sort of remains and everything.
Yeah.
But they do seem more, as you say, like a warlike people than the Greeks, who are more into their temples and arts and sort of staying put and building, impressive monuments.
Yeah. And it's the Greeks that we remember, Richard, not the Spartans.
Did the Spartans do that really beautiful pottery that I remember seeing them in that museum in Cambridge? The Fitzwilliam Museum had a lot of Greek pottery, and it was kind of red with black figures. Was that from Sparta?
Etruscan, I think.
It was where?
Etruscan.
I think
was Etruscan.
I think so.
Was it?
Yeah, I
thought
think
it was Greek.
Well, you're talking about the Aegean pottery. But when George is right. Some lot when the color red, Tuscany, they like their ochres, so that's more of an Etruscan, sign. But one thing we haven't done today, and we won't do today, is looking at the ancient Greek world. We're just skirting around these different worlds to try and get where we are. So good. Right, Pat.
What years were they sort of not in power, but successful?
Right. So basically, we got sort of from the 900s into the sort of the 400s. The Peloponnese War, we're talking about that ends about 404 BC. Right. So if we want to think about the timeline, the Carthaginians at that stage in Africa are starting to sort of, be a people, a people of standing, whereas the Romans are just sort of in a cesspit around Rome and a few other places. The Etruscans are a huge sort of enlightened people at this stage, right? It's only when I think in many ways what we've got is that the Greeks eventually defeat the Spartans, and this is all going down to when the Spartans are sort of eventually absorbed into the Greek world by the 190s BC. So eventually the Spartans disappear, and then the Roman world sort of grabs in ancient Greece in the 140s, the 146 BC, grabs it in, and then sort of the individual identities of the Greek world just flow into one. It's just like the Greek people, but the people, the thieves, and the idea of sort of this great Alexander the Great, all these things sort of go out the window. But up until the 140s, the Greeks are all these little worlds. So Judith. Yeah, Judith. Yeah. Well,
Oh, there she is.
well,
Hi.
basically, when I phoned you all yesterday, to say the class was off, right?
Call me.
I was actually inside UNE house, filming something, which I can't say what it is. Actually, I don't know what it was. I don't even know what production I was in yesterday, which is good. So I can't tell anyone about it. But that's what I phoned you all from yesterday. I thought I'd tell you. Judith, anything you want to say, Jude?
Only quickly when you mentioned, because I've only heard half of your lecture, but I picked up on earthquakes. Even to this day in that part of the world, there's at least one or two every year, earthquakes in various of the islands and around and in the sea. And so the things being lost, I imagine.
Yes.
All the time, I should think.
One of the things about the Gulf of Corinth, I don't know if you know this, but the Greek engineers have devised a new bridge design, right? So what they've got these massive they've got these huge sort of holes dug into the ground, right? Big hollows dug into the ground, and they fill them with gravel, right? And then they put the massive girders above that support the bridge. So when there's an earth tremor, the whole thing moves around in this sort of gravel bed underneath, right? And the bridge stays up. But if you connect the bridge into the rock, it'll just collapse.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to give the Japanese some of this. We'll say that the Greeks designed that, but let's just say that there's a bit of Japanese engineering in it, because the Japanese have got a lot of this stuff. Right, Will, do you want to say anything before we have a break now? It's 8:30.
Well, my observation, tribal states or tribal groups with villages became city-states. They were military oriented initially. The Greeks brought the philosophy and the political.
Yes.
Rome started out with the military. They became political. Then they returned to the military and the fall of the Roman Empire. So in a capsule, within 800 to 1,000 years, that's the change that you had from point A to point B. And tribal peoples, as we were in Wales, tribal peoples.
Exactly.
UK.
I agree. Well, that's quite a small analogy, but that's a major analogy in the sense that it's a lot. Well, what everything you just said is completely correct, but it's almost as if there's a good point there, because at the end of the Roman world in the West, that date 476, the last Roman emperor was actually Romulus. The first Roman emperor was Romulus, right? well, he wasn't an emperor really. He was a guy who had a few mates, thugs in 753 BC. But anyway, that's not the point. But anyway, so it was Audacia, who was actually like this sort of general that the Romans had put in place. And he just basically thought, I've had enough of this. I'm going to march into Rome, take it over, kick out this sort of Roman emperor, and we'll just go back to the way it was. And that's basically what happened. Oh, and there's an interesting thing here. There's an interesting story that when Rome fell, because in 476 there was two Romes. There was the Rome of the West, which was where modern day Rome is today, and there was the Rome of the East, where Constantinople, Istanbul is, right? And when the city was finally fell, when Rome finally fell, and the Western Roman Empire collapsed forever, right? They basically gathered all the bits and bobs together, all the old documents, put them on a boat, and sent them over to the Eastern Roman Emperor and said, right, you can keep Rome, right? But we don't want Rome anymore. You've got your own Rome, and that's it. And that's the way it happened, right? So it's a bit weird, but that's exactly what happened. It was like the keys of Rome were given to the new Rome. And there's another weird fact here, right? Which is an odd fact, right? When Istanbul, when Constantinople eventually fell in 1453, the Mehmed the Great, you could say Mehmed the Merciful, Mehmed II, when he captured, which had been Constantinople, and renamed, and it was eventually become Istanbul, he basically said, actually, I can now create a new Roman Empire, right? And it's just like this mantle of the Roman Empire just keeps going, because it's like it's so full of all these little sort of tender bits and stories that nobody can let it go. Not even Mehmed the Great. But that's another story for another day. Right, we're going to have a break now. We'll have a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back with Thermopylae after the break. See you soon, guys. Oh, and don't forget, Pat, give Anne a ring.
Oh, right. Okay.
We'll be back
I'm
soon.
sorry, I'll be leaving, so I won't be able to join you later.
Okay, then, Will. So hopefully see you next week.
Hopefully next week. All right.
Okay.
Thanks
Night,
very
Will.
much. Have a
My
good night.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
night to you all.
Night, Will. Night. Right, let's have a break. See you, Will. Right, so I gotta do that. Thermopylae. There's a song. Thermopylae. Oh, what the hell's going on here? Luckily. Oh shit. Why do you? Oh god, you gotta feel like an elf. Fine. I think it's Stephen. So. Costume. Have you got Stephen? Shit. What are you doing? Na, 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 na. Wheeler van. Oh, I don't know where Annie is. What are you doing now? Where are they all, Rich? Oh, there they are. Come on, let's get on with it. Let's get straight down to the undies. Right. Chicken. Oh, right, yeah, chicken. Right, no Anne then. Anne hasn't turned up. Are we there? Are we there, Pat? Yes, at Sparta found, apparently. Right. Okay, let's get back to it. Did I cut and do that then? I can't remember if I did. Right, I can't remember if I did. Right, okay. There, head space bingo. Right, okay. A couple of just check an image there, and then let's go into that. So, right. So, in many ways, we're starting to get the crux of it, and I think the crux is that the Roman world is extremely complex, and it's all the elements of all of these things that we're looking at. The idea of culture, Greece, the idea of seafaring, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, the idea of warring, and the sense of class comes from the world of the Thracians, the Dacians, and the Spartans. And we haven't actually mentioned one of the weird things that we're not going to do today. We could mention religion, which comes from the Persians, actually. Mithras, it's like a Persian god, you know. So we haven't mentioned that, but we could mention Egypt, for example. So I wanted to, by the end today, sort of has Cleopatra's tomb been found? It's just like an old Daily Mail thing from a few years ago. And have we got any archaeological evidence from the Battle of Thermopylae, which is that's sort of battling back at Goth, wanting some archaeological information, which is a really good point. So anyway, the point is that King Leonidas, 480 BC, it's an empiric victory for the Persians, but mental and moral victory, it's on the side of the Spartans and the Greeks. It's a legendary last stand. It's the reverse of. It's a bit like Rorke's Drift, you know, January 1879. It's a bit like that, but where the British mission there lives at Thermopylae, the Spartans die. However, so a bit of the background. So what we've got to do, let's just get into some of this stuff. Okay, there. Don't want that. Right. So it's oh, hang on, we didn't want that one there. Okay. So the whole thing doesn't actually happen. The whole thing doesn't actually happen out in the open. It actually occurs at a place called Thermopylae in a gate. So they're defending a gate, right? It's not a field where there's a group of warriors trying to defend against this huge, massive frig-off Persian army led by Xerxes. They're defending a gateway, right? So all of these things. So it's sort of setting the scene. And the Spartans had this advance warning that the Persian armies were on the Persian armies. Yeah, the Persian invasion was on its way, a naval invasion. And it was like, you know, this great sort of this great army, right? Would be the beginning of the end of the Persians, because a year later, the Greeks and what after the Spartans categorically defeated the Persians of an army of 100,000 Persians versus 85,000 Greeks. So basically, this was in regards to an Alamo. Yeah, this was the Battle of Thermopylae was the Alamo in Texas. I think that was in 1847, wasn't it? I'm not really sure about the date there, but and then later on, the Mexicans are defeated time and time again. So this is, you know, the Texans died at the Alamo, but then the Mexicans after that would not win another battle. And this is the same thing. So the Battle of Thermopylae, the sort of Spartans and the Greeks lose, but a year later they defeat this Persian army once and for all. So this is where we're getting the importance of this, and this lived in the mindset of the Greeks. You know, it really does. It's going to be there. It's going to. In Romney Comprehensive School, the first year, on the wall of Soapy Luxton's history room, there was like this. There was an image of Alexander the Great and Philip II on the wall, and I can remember that. That was obviously something completely different, but it's almost as if from that moment onwards, this is the thing that history looks at. This small little army, and basically, the statistics are as follows. There's the statistics. Xerxes lands an army, right? You know, thousands of vessels, lands an army of 150,000 warriors. Now, 150,000 warriors is basically the equivalent of everyone who was involved at the Battle of Waterloo, right? Everyone who was involved, the Prussians, the British, the Lowlanders, the French, that gives you an idea, right? So, but that was on one side, 150,000 Persians, cavalry, 1,200 ships landed them. You know, the Persians were morally in the right? In a way, right? They were morally in the right because they had the support. They had the support of the Egyptians. They had the support of the Ionians, who were also Greeks. The Phoenicians, we know Phoenicians. And then on the Greek side, Leonidas of Sparta, the king of Sparta, you know, and then you've got a small Greek, you know, naval force, right? Now, when people talk about the Spartans, right, they think, right, it's these 300 Spartans and then that's it. But there are others involved, right? There are about another 10,000, if you want to work out. We're not really sure involved, but they're spread around a bit. They're not at the battle. even if there was 10,000 on the Greek side against the Persians, it's still 15-1. But anyway, that's not the point. So the Battle of Thermopylae is always going to be remembered, and it's this sort of the here's another word, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. This great Xerxes. And in other words, when we think about Darius and Alexander the Great, years later, we think about Alexander the Great defeating these great Persians. It's almost as if after this, the Greeks start to believe in themselves, and they start to believe in themselves because they get themselves together in a unity, right? So no longer, a few years later, the Spartans are not going to be standing alone. They're going to be fighting alongside the Greeks. So so Thermopylae, and sort of give an idea where we are. So this is sort of this is the Gulf of Corinth. So down south there, you've got Sparta, Gulf of Corinth. There's Thermopylae. And I think we've got this sort of little map here, which is really useful. So let's give information now. Now the sources of this come from a Sicilian historian called Didorius Siculus, who's writing just before the birth of Christ, right? And he was there was another Greek writer called Ephorus, and again, remember the date, it's 480. So Herodotus is writing about this in a contemporary form. So there's lots of people, there's lots of sort of involvement. So what we've got is that sort of give you an overview, the Greeks have been fighting against the Persians for a long time. And the Oracle of Delphi, according to Herodotus, wrote, "Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta of the wide placed spaces." There, it says it all. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta of the wide spaces. It's Herodotus talking about the Spartans just living outside, right? Either your famed great town must be sacked by Perseus's sons, referring to this great land away, or if that be not, the whole of Lacedaemon, which is the area of Sparta as well, shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles, Leonidas. For not the strength of the lions or the bulls shall hold him. Strength against strength, for he has the power of Zeus, and will not be checked till one of these two he has consumed. So Herodotus tells us that Leonidas is in line with the prophecy, was convinced he was going to certain death, since his forces were not adequate for a victory against an army that was absolutely frigging huge, right? Now, whether this Persian army is as big as we say it was, right? Herodotus once claimed that the army of the Persians was over 2.6 million in size, but I think we're talking about the sort of huge army. So the Persians involved also on the side of the Persians were the Macedonians as well. So this is a really interesting thing, and what you've got Ethiopians, you've got people from Egypt, you've got the Ionian people, you've got loads of people from sort of Iran, and even as far as over by India, right? So Dorius Siculus. So to sort of give you a little bit of a sort of idea, let's sort of get into it. So on the map, so on the first day, the Persians arrive at Thermopylae, and first day of the battle, Xerxes resolved to attack the Greeks. So there was a standoff. So Xerxes is there with his massive army, and there's a group of Greeks. So because it was a narrow area. So it was a really narrow area. So Leonidas, the old Thermopylae, the sort of old city. This is where they're going to stand, in the ruins of the old gate. And basically, Xerxes sends his soldiers in. It's a frontal assault, and he uses 10,000 men to attack the Greeks. So they're going in and then in and then in and then in. So I'll give you an idea again, sort of give you a bit of a backdrop. Let's use this image. So they're being attacked. They're going in there and in there. So Diodorus Siculus writes, and this is a writer before the birth of Christ. So obviously Diodorus Siculus is writing about over 300 years later, where Herodotus is actually writing at the time, right? That's the difference. So thinking about that. So Diodorus says the men stood shoulder to shoulder. There they are, you know. And there's a film about this as well. Superior in valor in the great size of their shields. So Herodotus says that the units for each city were kept together. And the Greeks killed so many that Xerxes, this great sort of Persian leader, is said to have stood up 3 times from the seat from which he was watching the battle. And it says that Xerxes, having taken the measure of the enemy, threw his best troops into a final assault the same day. The Immortals. Now, that's another name that brings back in. The Persians have got these Immortals. They've got this elite guard. It's like Napoleon's old and middle and new guard, the great grenadiers of the French army at Waterloo. This is the ancient equivalent, the Immortals of the Persians. And the Immortals, however, fared no better. And the Greeks defeated them. And the Spartans reportedly used the tactic of feigning retreat and then turning and killing the enemy troops when they ran after them. So in other words, they ran away and they went back. It's a bit like, yeah. And actually, when we think about history and we think about battles and stuff, just think, Harold used the same strategy at the Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October in 1066, William did. Sorry, that again. William used the same tactics against Harold. So basically, at the Battle of Hastings. So Harold thinks he's winning, right? So his men break ranks, chase after King William's men, only to find out that King William's men turn around and then attack Harold. And it's a nightmare, right? So this is actually what's happening. But the likes of Leonidas and his Spartans and the Thebans and everybody else are there. So there's a second day. There's a day 2. This is not all on one single day. So they're all sort of sat there, you know, smoking their spliffs. No, they're not. But you can imagine that there's a few dead, you know. So Xerxes again sent in the infantry to attack the pass, you know, the gateway, supposing that their enemies, being so few, were now disabled by wounds and could no longer resist. However, the Persians had no more success on the second day than the first. Xerxes at last stopped the assault and withdrew to his camp, totally perplexed, right? So later that day, however, so remember, those are the facts and figures again. Later that day, however, as Xerxes was pondering what to do next, he received a windfall, right? And what that windfall is that there was a few Greeks. Can you see that map there, right? So the Persians are attacking. So in other words, the Xerxes, right, wins by default, right? He doesn't win like he sort of goes around, right? So later that day, Xerxes was pondering what to do next. He received a windfall. He found out there was a mountain path. So you're that that purple line there. So in other words, Xerxes going, higher Spartans, we're not going to attack anymore. We're going to retreat, right? But instead of retreating, he goes all the way around the mountain, right? Through the mountain pass, to behind the Spartans, right? So Herodotus reports that Xerxes sent his commander, Euxanes, that evening with the men under his command. What was the other immortals? Because there was more immortals. So remember, he had 150,000 men. He can have as many as mortals as he likes, right? So they go around. They go all the way around, and there's the supply base of Leonidas, right? So they go all the way around behind, passing the supply base, right? Cutting off support for Leonidas. So if Leonidas obviously had support, from behind, but now, right, Xerxes is attacking from front and rear, right? So according to Diodorus Siculus, obviously he's writing, 300 years later, Hydarnes, who's the other commander under Xerxes, has 20,000 men, right? So on the third day, here we go. This is the terror of the day. On the third day at daybreak, right? Those guarding the pass became aware of the outflanking Persian column by the rustling of oak leaves, and Herodotus says they jumped up and were greatly amazed. There was the Phocians, right? Basically, there was too many of them. So the Phocians retreated and just basically ran away, and then these 20,000 Persians massed all the way to encircling the Greek force. Learning from a runner that the Phocians had not held the path, Leonidas called it council of war, and basically some of the Greeks said, "Look, we should withdraw." Right? Leonidas told his allies that they could leave if they wanted to, while many of the Greeks took him up on his offer and fled around. So in other words, what's happened? Now, this is the thing about history. It wasn't only 300 Spartans, right? There was 2,000 of them on the last day. So other Greeks joined, right? So there was 2,000 of them on the last day, right? The Thespians and the Thebans. So, the Spartans. There was 2,000 of them versus 20,000 on one side and however on the other side. So Leonidas's actions had been the subject of much discussion, right? It is commonly stated the Spartans were obeying the laws of Sparta by not retreating. So in other words, we don't retreat, right? And also Leonidas, it was prophesied that Leonidas would actually die. So the oracle said at Delphi, you're going to die, right? So he decided to prove the oracle right. So one commonly accepted is that Leonidas chose to form a rear guard so that the other Greek contingents could get away. If all the troops had retreated, the open ground beyond the pass would have allowed the Persian cavalry to run the Greeks down. If they had all remained at the pass, they would have been encircled and would have eventually all been killed. By covering the retreat and continuing to block the pass, Leonidas could save more than 3,000 men who would be able to fight again. So in other words, this is about Leonidas actually saving what was left of the Greek army, right? So what's basically Plutarch, there's Plutarch's talking about this as well. So what's happening now? What's happening now is this sort of final battle. So this sort of scene, I think what we're doing here, this is in the melee of they're being attacked from behind at this stage, right? So they're at the front there and so on. So basically, what's happening is that there's the final assault. So the final day, the final assault, right? At dawn, Xerxes made some libations to the gods, saying, "Look, pausing to allow the immortals sufficient time to descend the mountains," and then began his advance. So from both sides. So these poor guys are being attacked from both sides. So a Persian force of 10,000 men comprising light infantry and cavalry charged at the front of the Greek formation, right? So this is Xerxes' other general. The Greeks this time sailed forth from the wall to meet the Persians in the wider part of the pass, and in an attempt to slaughter as many Persians as they could. They fought with spears until every spear was shattered. In this struggle, Herodotus states that 2 of Xerxes' own brothers died. Leonidas also died in the assault, shot down by Persian archers, and the 2 sides fought over his body, and the Greeks took possession. As the immortals approached, the Greeks withdrew and took a stand on a hill behind the wall. The Thebans, not the Spartans, moved away from their companions and with their hands upraised advanced towards the barbarians. But a few were slain before their surrender was accepted. The king later had the Theban prisoners branded with the royal mark of the remaining defenders. Herodotus says, here they defended themselves to the last, those who still had swords using them and the others resisting with their hands and teeth. Xerxes basically demolished Thermopylae. He pulled it down. He made sure that there was nothing left. The end of the battle was as follows. Thermopylae was thus open to the Persian army, according to Herodotus. But the Persians likely lost 20,000 men. The Greeks were annihilated. They lost 2,000 men. Herodotus said at one point 4,000 Greeks died, but it's probably more like 2,000. So what this meant was that the following year, the Greeks realized that they could defeat finally the Persians, and they gathered together, and lo and behold, they did the following year defeat the Persians conclusively, and they would also defeat the Persians within a sea battle situation as well. So this was all building to this. So it was an empiric victory for the Persians, because the following year the Persians would have some of their own medicine and be wiped out by the Greeks. So I wanted to sort of give you that. I wanted to sort of put that in there. And one of the big questions at the end, not at the end totally of this, is that one of the big questions being asked is, has any archaeological evidence been found of the Spartans' last stand at Thermopylae? They do believe that they found some arrowheads. The problem with all of this is that there's been other activity at the locality since. There's been other fighting, so it's very, very difficult to work out what is the archaeological evidence associated with Thermopylae from that specific date in 480, and what other archaeological evidence has actually ended up in the ground since. But the problem is, right, this is a problem with every single battle in history. Even when they go to excavate bits of the Battle of Waterloo, right, 1815, they struggle to get the evidence that they need. Even the Battle of Islandawana in January 1879, they struggle to get the proper archaeological evidence of Islandawana, and that's not so many years ago. So actually finding the archaeological evidence of Thermopylae is very, very difficult. So finally, what I'm going to do now, it's 9:19, and we will be, I think what we will do is finish at past, right? So you've got your money's worth tonight. So as I said, you've got this thing on National Geographic tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And the headline news are this locality, Cleopatra's final secret. And it says they found hundreds of coins at this locality, which is basically an old port of Egypt. Hundreds of coins that depict Cleopatra the 7th. So she wasn't the first Cleopatra, she was the 7th Cleopatra, but this is the Cleopatra associated with Antony and the likes of Julius Caesar. And actually, the son of Cleopatra, Ptolemy, one of the Ptolemies, was actually the son of Julius Caesar. So work that one out. So the archaeologists who led the team believe the female pharaoh's tomb might be nearby, which is based on another image that I'm going to show you. So hundreds of coins depicting Cleopatra, lover of, again, Mark Antony, has been, and Julius Caesar has been discovered near this site, which is Tamposiri Magna. And they found all these coins, and they think that they would do a big reveal in this program on National Geographic. The coins were found within a temple dedicated to the goddess Isis, which would have been a revered god associated with Cleopatra. And her team found hundreds of coins across the site, more than 200 inside the courtyard of the temple, more than 300 at the entrance, and more in other localities within or near the temple. Notably, the team unearthed more than 330 coins near a wall of the temple in a sacred trench that appears to have been hidden. What's more, researchers revealed a port. So this is the area of the port of Cleopatra, right, which is nearby this temple. Most of the coins are made of bronze, and while the excavation, cleaning, and identification of coins is ongoing, the coins found at the entranceway and courtyard of the temple were intended as offerings to the goddess Isis and may have been associated with offerings to Cleopatra herself and a burial place nearby. However, there's another article which predates this as well. And the other article is as follows. So this is where we're talking about this locality, and we're talking about the port, and this image itself. Now, I can remember actually doing this in the Lantern Major class. Well, no, we're not in the Lantern Major class. No, we did it as a cutting, actually. I think I did this online because this actually dates. I'm trying to get my notes up here. This dates to 2022, so obviously I wasn't teaching at Lantern Major at that time. We've been online since. So the headline news: has Cleopatra's tomb been found? A tunnel. The tunnel carvings, tunnel carved in rock deemed a geometric miracle, is discovered 43 feet below an ancient temple that may lead to the long lost burial site of the Egyptians' last pharaoh and her lover Mark Antony. It's not exactly sure. It's not exactly fair saying it's the last pharaoh, because her son, who was actually the son of Julius Caesar at this stage, which was about 14 years after the death of Julius Caesar, that was Ptolemy, and yeah, so technically that's slightly wrong. So archaeologists working on a site in Egypt believe they have found a tunnel that leads to Cleopatra's tomb. Theories suggest she was buried beneath Taposiris Magna Temple, which is in fact that there in front of us, near the ancient capital of Alexandria. There we go. Ptolemaic Alexandria. And the tunnel is carved through layers of rock and stretches, wait for it, guys, wait for it, 4,800 feet underground, having 4,800 feet of tunnels. And most of it is 6 feet high. This is a mastery of engineering. Experts say finding the tomb of the ancient queen would be the most important discovery ever in the history of archaeology. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? You know, a tunnel carved through layers of rock being found under the top Cyrus Magna Temple of Cyrus. Osiris temple, basically, top Osiris Magna Temple. And the problem is they haven't actually examined them all, right? They really haven't. It's a geometric miracle. And it's believed that we know who created the tunnels. It was a guy by the name of Eupolinos of the Greek islands of Samos. So there's another thing there. We've mentioned something. So we're looking, right? So the timeline that we're looking at, I've just got to remember myself. I'm pretty sure that Cleopatra, I've just got to date check this. I'm pretty sure it's 30 years BC when she dies. Oh my God, I'm right. Smack on. It's the 10th of August, 30 BC. So she dies at that stage. And I think the link here is Eupolinos, a Greek. So the Greeks are actually great engineers. So the Romans also had to call upon the Greek engineers. There we go. And so the Greeks are building this stuff for Cleopatra, and then the Greeks are probably going to be building this stuff for the Romans. Now, remember, this is an interesting issue, right? This is an interesting issue. So the Romans take over the Greek world in 147 BC, right? But the Romans have not taken over the Egyptian world until the death of Cleopatra on the 10th of August in the year 30 BC. And that's a really weird thing. So it must have been that the Egyptians must have had quite a powerful army to stop the Romans capturing it earlier. And the weird thing is, obviously, Mark Antony with his Roman army, right, fighting another Roman army, and obviously Mark Antony's defeated, and obviously Cleopatra dies. So, there's a good chance that the Queen is buried there, but they haven't actually found her yet, which is obviously one of those things. And it goes on to say, the key to all of this, if there's a 1% chance that the last Queen of Egypt, not the last pharaoh, the last Queen of Egypt could be buried there, they want to find her. And obviously the search has been going on for 3 years now, might go on for another 30. This is the first time that archaeologists have found the tunnel. So they didn't know the tunnels existed up until that point underneath Tap Osiris Magna Temple. She wanted to be buried associated with Mark Antony, right? And the true meaning of Osiris and the cult and where she's buried is key to understanding where she is. And the tunnels themselves, right, wait for it, are 43 feet below the surface. So they're not actually drop tunnels where somebody scoops a load of rock out the ground and then puts a roof over it. These are tunnels 43 feet below the surface, and there's 4,800 feet of these tunnels. So unfortunately, they haven't actually looked at all the tunnel network. And finishing very shortly now, 2 minutes away from 5:30, teams working at the site found a part of the tunnel that was submerged under the Mediterranean. A number of pottery vessels and other pottery were found underneath the mud sediments that go underneath the Mediterranean. So there's more of this tunnel network, and that's probably where she's buried, underneath the water. So the researchers believe that Tap Osiris Magna's temple foundations and where she's buried. And the problem is, because the area has been hit 23 times by earthquakes, since we know it's been hit 23 times since AD 320, right? So where she could be buried could sort of be under the water, and the tunnel system collapsed and all the rest of it. And then it ties us directly back to Sparta earlier on, where Sparta itself was hit by numerous tremors, which obviously destroyed Sparta. And then finally back to these coins. This is back in 2022. Now as well, like more coins, but obviously back in 2022, they found a number of important artifacts associated with Cleopatra, lots of coins as well, even back then, bearing the images and names of both Queen Cleopatra, Alexander the Great, and a number of beheaded statues and statues of the goddess Osiris as well. So it's significant that we could actually, have something that's associated with Cleopatra. And she reigned from 51 BC to 30 years BC. She's contemporary with Julius Caesar, who died in 44 BC. And she's the one that you always think about from the films, and Elizabeth Taylor playing that role. And there's much more in regards to images of the burial place for Cleopatra, and many more exciting things. So what we might do, we might come back to this. We might come back to the Greek world, Egyptian world. We've got to look at the Egyptian world before we can even continue on to look at Rome, and we've got to look at the Persians before we can continue to look at the Romans as well. So on that note, we'll call it a day. So again, I love these little images in front of us, and obviously just think that's 43 feet down, and they were only really discovered at the time of the pandemic. So on that note, let's see. And Anne didn't join us, or did she join us? No, she didn't. Right, no, she didn't. She didn't. Right, okay then. Judith, anything? Judith, yeah.
No,
Right.
I've got nothing. Sorry, talking over you. No, I've got nothing to add. No, that was really interesting. Thank you.
Good. Shame Anne didn't join us, but I don't know what she's doing wrong. Did you have a word with her, Pat?
I did, and it's her computer, and I sent her another link. You know, the first one.
Yeah.
Do before you do the word thing. She was doing the password and not getting through. Anyhow, I think her computer's messed up a bit, but she'll be here next time, I'm sure.
Good. Well, I'll put it on the diary to say that she's turned up. Oh, that's the best thing to do. Right. Anything from you, Goff?
No, it's very good. Lots of good images. Thanks very much.
And actually, what I might start off with is some more of these images of the find next week, and just sort of maybe there was a lot of them tonight. A lot of these other images from the temple associated Tapasiris Magna Temple. Maybe I could do that next week, but it means that I do ancient Egypt next week. I might do that. I might start off with that. Anyway, if there's nothing else, Goff, I will go on to Richard.
Oh, very interesting.
Good. And finally, we've got Margaret.
If they do ever find Cleopatra by some miracle, would modern technology be able to find out how she died, if it was with an asp or if it was poison?
There's two things I'd like to ask. Do you know what? We will start off with this next week, but not that question. But I think the back to this thing about the finding of the U thingamajig from Clacton. This is more plausible that the one thing, whether she could, I think the answer is that because of being killed by an asp is not going to be in the osteology record. There's going to be no sign, but I think maybe if there was some kind of reaction, i.e. she went into some kind of spasm and she, you know, if there's bone breakage and stuff, it might indicate that something quite traumatic happened at the end of her life. So that might indicate that she's been bitten by a snake. Right. But I think lots of things. I think that's possible because you're in a spasm. You're gonna, your bones are you're gonna be banging your hands and all the rest of it. So that's possible. I'm sort of, do you know what? Right, I forgot my camera ain't on. So you're all over the place, going, banging it against the wall. Bang, you might have broken phalanges and all these different type of things. So that could be a sign. What interests me more than anything is that if they did find her bones, they might actually find an association with the son, the last Ptolemy of Egypt. And if this is the tradition, the son might be buried with her. And if the son's buried with her, Julius Caesar being the dad, we have then got a signature for Julius Caesar, right? And that would be amazing, right? So all those things coming in, that would be so powerful.
Yeah.
And
would they be able to tell anything from any remaining teeth? Would that show poison?
No, it wouldn't. It would not have gone. But it's. I think obviously historians are writing about this. We're being killed by the horrible asp. It might be interesting to find out maybe other ways. There's this thing that she may have taken poison. So, I tell you what, if I was in her shoes, I would have taken poison because if the Romans captured her, she would have had a horrible death. There are punishments in the Roman world which are worse than death, right? I'm not going to go into detail, but
Don't go there.
but basically it would involve being placed into a coliseum,
Oh, I know.
being
Horrible.
strapped down with a bull, and
I
that's
know.
it.
Horrible.
So Cleopatra would not have wanted to be captured, or if she was captured, it could have meant some kind of negotiation for a son, but that's another story altogether. But again, what we're doing, we're building up the story of ancient Rome pretty well, and it's coming together really well. So we'll know how these people think really well when we jump on those boats.
Very good.
So anybody want to say anything else, Judith, before we go?
No.
No.
Okay, right, we'll call it a day. That's been a long one tonight, so we'll be back next Wednesday. I'm gonna say good night. Looking forward to my mega Madeira cake when Goff goes away. So night, Goff, Richard, Margaret, Pat, and
Bye,
Judith.
guys.
So long.
Bye. Bye.
So
Bye.
long.
Night,
So
guys.
long.
So long,
Bye.
guys. So long, Richard. Night, Pat. Oh, Goff's still there. How you doing, Goff? Anyway, I don't know if anyone joined us tonight, but I'm going to look in the box now quickly. We didn't do last night because I was on set, and it's almost as if I might have a quick drink now. I might have a lie down actually. So I'm just gonna go on here. I'm just gonna see if we did have a live. Sparta. I'm just gonna go on here. Oh, Nylog, nice. Let's see if we. Thank you, Nylog. Nylog, there you go. You can see that I'm doing more than just this. Don't forget, guys, like and subscribe. And anyone wants to make anyone who wants to make a donation is very, very welcome. And thank you, Nylog. Nylog, there you go. You can see that I'm doing more than like and subscribe. And anyone wants to make a donation. Thank you, guys. I'm just going to end the record now, so I can look in the chat box. Nothing there. One. Oh, this is a different chat thing. There's only one chat box. There's nothing there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do.